I'm honored to be invited for the Firefly Society to talk. It was really great to have Bob Dunn last time in our class, and we've been often before that we emailed and chatted. And, so he asked me to come tonight, and he said, "Oh, what do you want to talk about?" I said, "Oh, whatever is fine." And he said, "Oh, maybe the more esoteric background of the system of Reiki and where it's coming from originally." So I thought, let's do that and maybe do a little bit of practice as well together. I've been, maybe first a little bit about myself. I've been teaching the system of Reiki for the last 20 years, full time. And when I first learned the system of Reiki, I was living in India and Nepal for 2 years. And it was quite, my teacher at the time, when I did Reiki 1, 2, and 3, he was smoking pot while he was teaching. So it was a bit of a strange kind of Reiki class. And then afterwards I asked him all these questions, because all these questions for me came up. And then he said, "Oh, don't ask me questions, I don't know anything." I go, "Okay, great. What next," right? And so then I started to do a lot of research within the system of Reiki, did lots of different trainings over the years with Japanese Reiki teachers, with modern Western Reiki teachers, and I still had kind of difficulty finding what I was looking for. And that was really a deep spiritual practice, because for me, if I really thought about it, the system of Reiki was a very deep spiritual practice, not just hands-on healing. And one of the elements what really pointed it out for me was the precepts. And the precepts, do not anger, do not worry, be grateful. One is like practice diligently or work hard, but you can also translate it a little bit differently as be true to your way and your being, and show compassion to yourself and others. Because as we all know, they look very simple, right? But it's so hard, particularly probably if you live here in New York and everybody's bumping into you and you're walking from your hotel to this evening and all these other things are happening. I think it was for me such an important element, that focus of the precepts. And so also when I lived in India, what was one of the other things, there was lots of local healers around. They were either Nepali or Tibetan or Hindu. And if I asked any of those healers what they were doing for themselves or how did they do the healing, all of them had a very strict personal development practice, like where they would do really deep meditation practices. And I thought, when I learned the system of Reiki, I wasn't really taught that. And I remember I met this Tibetan Tulku. A Tulku is like a reincarnated Lama, and he was 21, and he stayed in the same guest house where we were staying. And he said, "Oh, what is Reiki?" I said, at that time, I was still kind of new to it all. And I said, "Oh, some hands-on healing." And I was sitting there, and he goes, "Oh, something like this," and he puts his hand like this, and it felt like this fan was, like, and I go, yeah, something like that. And it's like, geez, how does he do this, right? I want what he has. So then I found out that he'd been meditating in a cave for 9 months with his teacher, and I thought, wow, this is quite interesting. And then when I did more research about the system of Reiki, we learned that Mikasui was sitting on his mountaintop for 21 days, meditating and practicing to really get this direct experience of Reiki. And often we see Reiki as something external, like a light what hangs somewhere over there. But actually, really, from a traditional approach, it's you. You are that light. And the more we kind of look externally for that light, the more we also need to go like, I need to grab it, I need to pull it in. And that also keeps us always very busy. But if we start to realize that we are that light, then we can also walk around in that light, if that makes sense. And for me, that really started to make more and more sense when I started to train with people in Japan who are Buddhist monks and nuns, priests and priestesses, who also did certain forms of healing. And what is really interesting that it's quite difficult to actually gain access to those kind of teachers in Japan. It's not where you book in a class and you pay them. You actually either have to be invited or you have to be recommended. But if you, for example, recommend me to your teacher in Japan, then you have to be probably trained with this priest or priestess maybe at least 10, 15 years. And then you have to have known me for about 10, 15 years, because if you recommend me and I'm going to make mistakes or I don't like it, then that reflects back on you. That makes sense? So before you actually can be recommended to these kind of teachers takes a long time. So quite some years ago I was recommended by a friend and to this one particular teacher, and he sent a lovely email in Japanese and English to him and to me, and then I didn't hear anything for a month or so, and so I emailed my friend and he said, oh, don't worry, he will email back. But I'm a little bit, no patience, no. I wanted to get going, so I emailed the gentleman and the priest, and he said, oh, I'm a bit busy, but I will email you back soon. And again, I didn't hear anything, and then I got all these questions about the system of Reiki from him. He said, oh, what do you think this means? What do you think the symbols stand for? What is the Reiju? What is Honsasei Shinen, the Reiki 2, one of the Reiki 2 symbols? And then when I read all these questions, I was like, oh, I think I'm in trouble. The way he wrote it, right? So then I tried to answer it as good as I could. And then finally, a while later, he said, okay, come to Japan. And so then I went to Japan and did some training with him. And what was really interesting, after a couple of days, he said, well, I had a bit of difficulty with you coming here to Japan. He said, because I saw that you did Reiki, and so he was trying to how modern Reiki was taught in Japan. And he actually did a Reiki 1 and 2 class with a modern Japanese Reiki teacher. And unfortunately, he said he didn't like it. Because those priests are so strict. They're really strict. And so we did the training, and then for a while, and then went back home, practiced, stayed in touch. And last year I went to my teacher again, and I emailed him to set up a date. And he said, okay, this time when you come, last time you came on your terms, but this time you come on my terms. And he said, so if you don't like it, then you go. So it's really interesting because they work in such a different way. So for example, I flew in from Sydney, and I had to have one little stop to change flights to Japan, and then I had to take a train for an hour and a half. So by the time I arrived at the train station, he was going to pick me up, and I step into his car. I'm not even a minute in his car, and he goes, okay, remember last time I taught you this, show me how to do it. And from that first moment till a week and a half later, we almost went like 20 hours a day. And it's a really different kind of teaching and practice. And particularly focusing on where the system of Reiki comes from. And not as a whole, but if we really look correctly, then we can see that Mikasui borrowed a lot of these teachings from Japanese esoteric spiritual practices. He was practicing himself. And the way my teacher also teaches in Japan is really funny, because, so for example, I'm a vegetarian and he knows I'm vegetarian. And so the second night I'm there, he makes this lovely meal and it's all raw fish, right? And so he just places it in front of me and I go, okay, and you eat it. And there's coffee. I hadn't drunk coffee since 2001 was my last coffee. And so after I ate the raw fish and drank the coffee, then he goes, so how does that relate to the precepts? So they teach in a very different way. So was I getting angry that he knows I'm a vegetarian and he's not serving it? Was I getting worried? Was I not being compassionate? Do you know what I mean? So they teach in a really kind of direct way, where it's very intriguing. Or he would say at like 9 o'clock in the evening, he would say, "Hey, now go to your room and go and practice. And when I ring the bell, then you show me." So the first time I do it, I go to my room. I'm not 1 second in the room, and he rings the bell. Go like, "What?" So I come back and okay, show me what you just practiced. And I go, "Okay." And it's like this constant kind of pushing those buttons to see how you react, and really, for me, it's really, do you embody the precepts? And, we all can feel some energy in our hands. It's not that difficult, really. We stick our finger in the PowerPoint over there, and we feel some energy. It's also not so difficult to see colors. We grab that stick over there and we hit ourselves on the head and we see beautiful colors night for days, who knows? But actually to embody those precepts, that is really difficult, right? It's not that easy. They look very easy on a little piece of paper. Do not anger, do not worry, be grateful. And I like the translation of be true to your way and your being, and show compassion to yourself and others. And, as you all live here in New York, it's a bit easier maybe where I live. I live in the middle of nowhere in Australia. Although then I was having this free little facial thing before I got here from L'Occitane. The guy said, "Oh, do you want one?" I said, "No problem, that sounds nice." And he said, "Oh, you're from Australia." I said, "Is it scary?" I said, "What do you mean scary?" And he said, "Oh, poisonous snakes." So yes, where I live we do have poisonous snakes, so you have to be careful. And so of course there's also a bit worry and those kind of things. But for me also the precepts are so important because we cannot always do hands-on healing, right? We cannot do hands-on healing on everybody here in the street we meet. But as much as possible we can walk in that space of the precepts of no anger, no worry, no fear, and being compassionate to people. Just being kind. Give them a smile or say hello or, "Oh, I like your dress," or "Nice t-shirt," or "Hey, great smile." And I think that already is healing in itself. Right? Don't you think so?
Yes.
And I think that is also really important to realize, because for me then the system of Reiki becomes really a way of life. So one thing when Mikasa was sitting on his mountaintop and practicing for 21 days is a very normal practices within Japanese esoteric teachings to go into the mountains and do 7-day practice, 21-day practice, then you get 100-day practice, and then sometimes 1,000-day practice. So if I would like to go for a 21-day practice, you cannot just do it because your teacher needs to give you permission to do it. Because it's quite dangerous. I mean, you can imagine also in Japan, wild boars, snakes, spiders, cold snow, rain, summer heat, and you sit there for 21 days on this mountaintop practicing and meditating can be quite confrontational, physically, energetically, emotionally, spiritually. So we can therefore already see that prior to that Mikasui sat on his mountaintop, he would have done some really intensive practice to prepare himself. And so, yes, as I said, nowadays you can still do, if you want and if you find the right teacher, these 21-day practices. Very difficult. I do sometimes, when I'm in Australia at home, I might do, say, 4 or 5 day practice where I do about 8-hour meditation a day. But then you still can make a cup of tea and you sit by the fire if it's winter, or, but if you sit in the forest, it's a whole different ball game. It's pretty, and it's only 8 hours. I mean, when you go into those mountains, you do probably only sleep for 4 hours, so it's about 20 hours practice. And I met some of these people in Japan who do these kind of practices, and the energy and the compassion and that openness what comes from them is just quite amazing. For me, they're like the 7-Eleven. They're like open 24 hours a day, and they're radiating this healing, this light, this joy, this compassion, this kindness And you just stand there and bask in their light, and then you walk away, you go like, wow, I think I just had 10 healings or 10 initiations. This was pretty wonderful. So when I first went to Japan and started to do research, I first went in 2001, and then I've been going back since. And the first time I particularly met with Buddhist priests or priestesses, and I showed them the precepts of the system of Reiki. All of them said, this is a shortcut to the Eightfold Path and the 6 Paramitas. So in Buddhism, you have the Sixfold Path, or the Eightfold Path and the 6 Paramitas. And again, they're like, for example, the Eightfold Path is it's all about really embodying the precepts, but it's a little bit more elaborate, right? And the 6 paramitas is the same. For example, the 6 paramitas: generosity, patience, perseverance. So we can all see that also in the precepts. So for example, patience. What is the antidote to anger? It's really patience, right? If you say something, and if I take a little bit of patience, then slowly my anger can melt away. Or generosity is really also about, for me also in reality, about anger, or about do not worry, but also about compassion, being generous to people, or being grateful. So for me, when we look at the precepts, Mikusui, and what was very common at that time, he was trying to open up these more Buddhist teachings of the Eightfold Path and the 6 Paramitas without pointing towards Buddhism. That makes sense? And it was a very common practice at that time because Japan had been closed for 200 years and suddenly it was opened up. And a lot of people turned against this opening up. Some were more a bit violent, and a lot of them said, let's go back to more spiritual values. But when they were going back to the more spiritual values, they wanted to open it up more, not just for monks or nuns or priests or priestesses, but for everybody, the baker, the farmer, etc. At that time also, there was a conflict between Buddhism and Shintoism and Shugendo. And therefore, you had to be a little bit careful. So for me, Mikusui was just pointing out this Eightfold Path and the 6 Paramitas in a simple way of the precepts, without looking that he was saying, oh, this is it and this is that. That makes sense? So actually, by really embodying that, we can really start to ultimately also embody those kind of teachings within Buddhism. Doesn't mean we have to become a Buddhist. And for me also, a Buddhist is not that we have to wear robes and shave our hair and put some malas around our wrist. It's in your heart, right? Like a good Christian or a good Muslim or a good Hindu or whatever it is, right? Or just a decent person what comes from this love and compassion. When I lived in Darjeeling, in India for a year, we had a Reiki center there, and we used to do treatments in the local community as a volunteer thing. And we used to go to these cafes. It was a very small little town, and there was quite a few people who are Western Tibetan Buddhist practitioners. They had their hair shaved and a robe on, and so often when you would sit in these cafes, they were arguing with each other, and it was all a bit new for me. This is 20 years ago, and they would say, oh, my Buddha is better than your Buddha, or my practice is better than my mala is. And I go, is this normal, right? I'm a bit confused. So one evening, I went to this Rinpoche, and Ken Rinpoche, he had his baseball cap on, really wrinkled face, lovely person. And Bronwyn, my partner, did Reiki treatments on his wife. And so one evening I went along and I said, oh, Ken Rinpoche, can I ask you some questions? And he said, yeah, no problem. And he said, well, for me it's all a bit new, but when I go to these cafes, these people are all arguing, is this normal? And he said, Franz, how do you spot real Buddhists? I said, I have no idea. He said, you grab a plank, hit them on the head, and see what the reaction is. And that is so true if you really think about it. Like often we get so confused about my Reiki is better than your Reiki, or my teachings is better than your, or yoga is better than Reiki, or Reiki is better than Tai Chi. Actually, that creates much more conflict. And therefore also when we really embody the precepts, then we also start to embody more like the 6 parameters, for example, or the Eightfold Path. So Eightfold Path is really interesting too, because they all start with right, so right livelihood, and one of them is right mind or right mindfulness. And the right mind and right mindfulness is really interesting because in Japanese, this is called shonen. And in Reiki 2, you have a mantra and a symbol. And if you, the phrase is Honshasei Shonen. So it really is pointing already, that phrase is pointing to Shonen, right mindfulness or right mind in the Eightfold Path. And often in a lot of modern Reiki, Honshasei Shonen is used as a kind of a distance healing symbol. But traditionally the phrase is coming from a Tendai concept of Hongaiku, if I hopefully pronounce it correctly. My Japanese is terrible. I can say sushi and Tokyo and samurai, and that's about it. So what it is really is about realizing that you are Buddha and Buddha is you, right? And therefore, literally translated, Honshasei Shonen can mean my original nature is right mind, or my original nature is right mindfulness, but can also be right can also means my original nature is a non-dual mind. Right? What means realizing that I'm you and you are me. So traditionally, Honshasei Shonen was not about distance healing, but really realizing that we're all interconnected with each other. Because the more we see a distance, the more we say, oh, I'm here, you're there, I need to send something to you, or I need to connect to you, or I need to bridge the gap between here and Michael over there. But all of this actually tells us that we have a feeling of disconnectedness. That makes sense? But what starts to happen if we start to feel more interconnected with each other? If you think about the precepts, if I start to feel more interconnected with all of you, or you start to feel more interconnected with me or with your surroundings, I have to be compassionate to myself, because else I know that it will have an effect on you, right? And therefore I also have to be compassionate to you, because I also know it will have an effect on me and on other people. So therefore, the more we go into this space of my original nature is a non-dual thought, or Honshasei Shonen, pointing to this right mind or right mindfulness, then we start to really also slowly lead a more compassionate life, because we start to feel that interconnectedness with each other. And I think that is so important. And nowadays already we think we're all getting connected through these, right? But actually, I think we get more and more disconnected to it. It looks like we're connected, but we connect through a gadget, right? And by actually going through this, we really disconnect from that feeling, what we have with each other. So, even if it's a great tool, don't get me wrong, I carry one with me just to set my alarm and take a picture. That's about, and to text Bogdan that I'm on my way, and I will help him with the chairs, what I didn't really do because I had a milkshake downstairs. But besides that, the point. So therefore, traditionally, Honshasei Shonen came from these old teachings within esoteric Japanese practices to really pinpoint that interconnectedness with each other. And of course, that interconnectedness with nature. My teacher, his teacher was a very famous priest in Japan, Sakai Ajari. Sakai Ajari belonged to this tradition of, it's a bad translation, but it's translated like that in English, marathon monks. And if you Google marathon monks on the internet, there's some really interesting little video clips. The marathon monks used to do a 7-year practice and almost walking a marathon a day in traditional clothing, straw slippers. And his teacher in his 50s did it, what was already quite old. And then after he'd finished it once, he said, I'm always a bit slow, I'm going to do it again. And normally you only do it once. There's only a couple of people who've done it twice. And my teacher was saying that when Sakai Ajari would walk into the mountains, he would say, oh, I can feel the Reiki, right? And for them, the mountains was the mother of Reiki. Because when we go into the mountains, we can really feel that interconnectedness much more so. Like with the sun, with the soil, with the tree, with the water. They had also lots of different practices to really feel that interconnectedness. They would stand under a waterfall, for example, to really feel that interconnectedness with the water. But here in this concrete jungle, it's a little bit harder. But I think actually it's much more needed here than maybe in the forest. Because in the forest, we can often feel that a little bit easier, isn't it? We feel a little bit more open. So therefore, traditionally, Honshu Seishinen was something you would meditate upon for yourself, so that you get the direct experience of that interconnectedness. Not just, oh, I'm going to do some distance healing, now I'm using it. No, I'm actually realizing I am you, you are me, and therefore, when I practice, when I feel I'm becoming more kind, that has an effect on you. When you feel you become more calm and kind, it has an effect on me. And we all kind of know that. If you sit in a cafe and someone walks in really angry, you can feel it, right? And sometimes it can have a huge ripple effect to the cafe. Or someone walks in really happy, you can feel that too. And I think another really important element is to realize sometimes we think that healing, between brackets, what that might mean, but say healing yourself or hands-on healing on someone else, has lots of ripple effects in that interconnectedness space. We did, many years ago, I had a Reiki 1 class, and we used to have regular weekly practice evenings in Sydney, Australia. And after this particular Reiki 1 class, this lady kept coming once a week. And each week she said, keep saying, oh, I can't feel anything. And so one day, about 2 months later or something like that, I said, okay, you keep saying that, but you keep coming back. Why are you coming back? And she said, oh, she got a bit flustered. And she said, well, I'm a manager. And about a month after the Reiki 1 class, while she'd been practicing on herself, one of the staff came up to me and said, oh, can I tell you something? I said, yeah, that's fine. And she said, well, I hope you don't get offended. And she said, okay. And said, I'm not sure what you've been doing in the last month, but you're less bitchy than normally. Right? So even that she was practicing on herself, just hands-on healing and Joshin Kokyu meditation and thinking about the precepts, slowly she became less bitchy. And that already had an effect on this one particular staff member. But then I said to her, I said, so your staff member, is he or she going home happier or not? What do you think? If life and work is a little bit, if my manager is a little bit less bitchy, you go home happier, right? I said, so maybe that person has a wife or a husband or 2 kids. So by practicing for you on yourself, that person goes home happier. Is he happier at home? Of course, right? So will that have an effect on his wife or husband or kids? Of course. So I said, by just practicing for yourself on a very interesting level, that can have a huge ripple effect, but often we don't really look at. And also because of that interconnectedness. And the more we realize that interconnectedness, then one smile, one touch, one, oh, you look lovely today, or are you okay? Can I give you a hand with something? Can I carry a shopping bag? Or whatever. It's already healing and can have a huge ripple effect. We don't always have to go with our hands like this. Because when I feel more into that space of interconnectedness, of Honsha-sation and my original nature is a non-dual thought, then of course my practice will have an effect on you and your practice will have an effect on me. That makes sense? And I think this is really what you see in all of these teachings, in yoga, in esoteric practices, in Buddhism, in Hinduism, really seeing and feeling that non-separateness or this non-duality. One other really interesting point is the first symbol and mantra in Reiki 2. Who's been practicing Reiki 2 here? Oh, just a couple. Anybody Reiki 1? Anybody new to Reiki? Oh, that's good too. Fantastic. Maybe I backtrack a little bit. So there's Reiki 1, 2, and 3. And for me, it's not really black and white. We have level 1, 2, and 3. Sometimes I meet Reiki 1 practitioners actually who have embodied the precepts much more so than maybe a Reiki teacher. Right? Sometimes I meet a person who's not done any Reiki who embodies the precepts much more so than maybe a Reiki 1, 2, or 3 practitioner. Right? And sometimes I remember I was sitting somewhere and this kid comes over, like young, and their parents do practice the system of Reiki, and the kid comes over and said, oh, and he puts his hand on me, and it was just like, wow, this is amazing. But because these kids are that bright light, so much easier than we as adults, right? We cover it up with all sorts of shit, right? All sorts of rubbish, and then we forget to see this beautiful bright light. So therefore also the more we go into this non-dual nature, this really interconnectedness, the more we start to peel away these layers so that we can lay bare that beautiful bright light. And one of the tools in Reiki 2 is the first symbol and mantra. And it kind of goes into a circle for the people who don't know Reiki 2. And when I was in Japan in last year, I was on this mountaintop called Mount Omine. And Mount Omine is really beautiful. It's been a spiritual practice ground for the last 1,300 years. So it's not, you cannot really go there as a tourist. You cannot stay there if you don't belong to a Buddhist association or group. So you really have to go there with someone who belongs there, and then you can stay. There's no snack bar, there's no shop. It takes about 4 hours steep climbing up, for me probably more, to get there. And anyway, I was practicing there for some days, and on the last day, just before we went down the mountains, I was going to the top, and there's a main temple complex and with some things, and I'm doing some meditation there where I every day kind of sat, and I opened my eyes, and there's this pillar with this kind of symbol, what they use in Reiki 2. And I go, what the hell? I've been here for 5 days. Why haven't I seen it before? But you know how these things come when you're ready. So I go to the temple and I said, oh, can I ask the priest something? And luckily my teacher was there, so he speaks English, so else I would have no idea what to do. And so I write down the first symbol. I'll say, can I show you something? And as soon as I drew it, the priest there said, oh, that means go to Kami. And Kami in Japan often is translated in English as God. But when he said it also, go to Kami, he said, oh, not God externally, but God inside you, right? Your inner God, your inner divine being, however we might call it, doesn't matter really. And so he was pointing out that the first symbol traditionally was like a monk's handwriting, what is quite common. You have like very specific Japanese kanji, and then it can also be a bit more elaborate. And then you also have I forgot the Japanese name, I can't remember. It starts with a B, and that's about it. I can tell you later. I have to look it up. And he said, oh, that is this particular monk's handwriting, and it means go to Kami. So he said, when you meditate upon this, you remember your inner Kami, your inner divine being. And of course, the more we remember our inner divine being, is that going to make a difference how we put our hands on someone? Of course, right? The more we shine and radiate this light outwards, then of course that's going to make a difference. That makes sense? So therefore, if we look at, for example, the first symbol, Chokurei, what I'm talking about, the Honsha Shinen, we can already see that Mikusui took them from Japanese spiritual teachings so that people who are a farmer and a baker and also some monk or a nun could practice and could realize this inner great bright light or this inner divine light, so therefore from that space would come hands-on healing on other people. That makes sense? Any questions so far?
I have one.
Oh, that's good.
Yes.
I thought New Yorkers were all quiet.
So there's so many other things that people practice that are like Reiki.
Yeah.
And what I always try to reconcile is like, how are these all the same thing? Because I feel like they're all the same thing.
Yeah.
But I don't really know if it's just a matter of, you know, having a different perspective on what seems like the same basic ideas.
Yeah, you know, I think I see it for myself always a bit like this. When you have a pyramid and you have all different teachings, then at the bottom of the pyramid they look very different, right? But then when you go deeper into the teachings and then deeper and then deeper, and then suddenly they look very, very similar. And I think when we only keep hanging on the bottom of these teachings, we always keep saying, oh, Buddhism is better than Hinduism or Christianity or whatever religion, or Reiki is better than yoga, yoga is better than, or it's different. But actually when we go deeper, we start to see the similarity in it. And all of them really are pointing out to lay bare that inner divine spirit, however we call it, doesn't matter. And that this divine spirit is about compassion and kindness, and feeling not overwhelmed by all the things what take place nowadays, you know, in the world. And so we might say, oh, but yoga looks very different, it's an asana. But hang on, in yoga there's also pranayama, mantrayana, where you chant mantras. Tai Chi, people say, oh, but that's only movements. Hang on, but also in Tai Chi there's certain meditation practices where you sit very still. In Tai Chi there's also some hands-on healing depending on which school you practice, right? It's the same in Taoism. I studied with a Taoist teacher for many years. Unfortunately, she passed away a few years ago. And in her way of Taoism and Qigong, there was also hands-on healing. The yogis in the past would also work with their hands, right? For me, hands-on healing really is our birthright. Like even if you haven't practiced the system of Reiki, that couple over there, they haven't practiced the system of Reiki, but look, their hands, where are they? They're on each other, right? That feels good, isn't it? Yeah? And, you know, I think we all have that we like to be touched or like to be held. If a kid falls over, you embrace them, or if an animal, or if you hurt yourself, you go like this, or if you have a headache, you go like this. So for me, hands-on healing is really our birthright. There's nothing, oh, now you're doing attunement and now you can do it. Sometimes that is what we make ourselves believe, right? I did a treatment many years ago on this woman. I didn't know her. She had no idea what the system of Reiki was. She had 3 weeks to go in her pregnancy. And she had what she was telling me, she had a really bad time during her pregnancy. And so someone said, oh, go and see France and have a Reiki treatment, but she had no idea. So she comes and lays on the table. Afterwards, she said, oh, I feel so relaxed. and the baby is so relaxed. And she goes, how can I take this home? I said, well, put your hands on yourself. And she said, I'll do that already. Of course, most pregnant women put their hands on themselves. I said, okay, but now change your intent. I said, what do you mean? I said, change your intent that you want to heal yourself and that you receive whatever you need. So this woman goes home. A week later, she books in again. And she said, Frans, I had the best week in my pregnancy. So now she only has 2 weeks to go, right? She said, I went home, did hands-on healing on myself. She said, my hands became all warm and tingling. The baby settled. I became so calm. She said, my husband came home and said, honey, you put your hands like this on my tummy. He'd never felt a baby before like that. He felt so more interconnected. These people had not practiced the system of Reiki, had not had the initiation. As some people might say, oh, but now they're leaking energy or they have to do a class. But for me, Reiki is about compassion, right? And this woman had the best week in her pregnancy in all these weeks. Then I can say I've been successful. They make sense? Sometimes we get a little bit too dogmatic. But healing for me is helping other people to feel good, not to. So here we come back to the 6 parameters. So perseverance, patience, and the Eightfold Path, right mindfulness, right action, right livelihood, and the precepts, do not anger, do not worry, is also not installing worry in other people. So if someone comes for a treatment and they want to take some hands-on healing, if I say, well, you can only do this for a week because else you're leaking energy, then what am I doing? I'm installing worry, right? But we all have that birthright of hands-on healing. However, the more I lay bare this inner great bright light through meditation, hands-on healing, yoga, of course, then that light emanates more and more from my being. Or the more that first symbol in Reiki 2, the more I go to Kami or go to my inner divine being, then of course there is more energy to support that. That makes sense too? So for me, I think really is realizing that all these different methods are not really different. It's only in our confused mind that they look different. And I think sometimes that is also done for commercial reasons. Right? We have to be honest about it. You know, now I can practice yoga, now I can practice, do you know what I mean? If we all say it all leads to the same thing, then it's a little bit harder. You know, like for example, you've got animal Reiki and human Reiki, but actually animal and human Reiki is exactly the same thing, ultimately. And so we have all these things, or Papa Smurf Reiki and whale Reiki, I don't know, you have now all these crazy, wonderful Reiki methods. But one is not better than the other. What most important, sometimes people say, hey Frans, how do you think I'm going with my practice? And then some people actually say, oh, I'm seeing colors now, or can you feel how much energy is coming out of my hand? I said, I'm not interested in that. I said, I'm interested if you feel in your daily life, do you feel you softening your anger, softening your worry, being more grateful, being more true to your way and your being, and being more compassionate. If you can tick those boxes, you're doing well. You're doing fine. That makes sense? So, for me, therefore, we can see that in Christianity, we can see this in Buddhism, we can see this, all these old traditions doing the same thing. But sometimes we get a bit caught up in this dogma. It has to be like this. And so for me, actually, going back to the roots of the system of Reiki and finding these traces of like that first symbol on Mount Domine or Honcha Seishinen, like really coming from these Tendai teachings of feeling that interconnectedness. The Reiki 3 symbol and mantra is wonderful because it's Daikomyo, and if you literally translate Daikomyo, it means great bright light. But actually, Daikomyo also can mean the Great Light Mantra. And the Great Light Mantra in Japan has been practiced since probably 6th, 7th century Japan. And so if I show the Reiki 3 symbol and mantra to some priests and nuns in Japan. They say, oh, this is the great light mantra. And what does the great light mantra do? Lay bare your inner great bright light. And therefore they say, the more you lay bare that inner great bright light, of course, that has a huge healing potential for with your hands, but also with your whole being. That makes sense too? So again, we can see where Mikusui took the Reiki 3 symbol and mantra from some Japanese esoteric teachings. So what was very common at that time, if you started up a practice at that time, what was very, very common, there were like hundreds of people starting these kind of healing practices. A lot of them involved hands-on healing, and it's said that in 1930 in Japan, one person in each family could practice some form of hands-on healing. Well, it's huge if you think about it, right? But Mikusui was actually a very small fish in that huge pond. He only had 2,000 students, while some of his friends, associates, had 500,000 students. What is huge. So they all did the same. Say if this was the pool of Japanese esoteric teachings, one person would say, oh, I like that, I don't like that, and I do like this. And that's what I'm going to teach and make it into a system. And the next one said, well, I don't like that, but I do like that, and I do like that. And that's what they made into a system. So you see a lot of similarities in all of these spiritual practices, what started to blossom in late 1800s, beginning 1900s in Japan. They all borrowed from the same pool, and mainly Shugendo. And why Shugendo? Because in that time and earlier on, Shugendo, if you were sick, there were no really Western doctors, maybe a couple, but if you were sick, like here maybe you would go to a herbalist, right, in many, many years ago, or you would go to a shaman, or in Europe you would go to a witch, or whatever we call it, or a druid, right? At that time, you would go to the Shugendo priest or priestess for healing. And they would do all sorts of different healing. They would do chanting of a mantra, or maybe chanting of, say, like the precepts. They might have done hands-on healing, or some herbs, or an initiation, those kind of things for healing. And Shugendo was often the birth ground of these healing groups around late 1800s, beginning 1900s. And why? Because if this is, again, I used the image of the mountain. If this is the mountain, a lot of these spiritual practices would kind of go like this to the top of the mountain, or zigzag. But Shugendo had something in it which was quite extreme and would almost go straight to the top. So a lot of these people practiced it to go straight to the top of the mountain, really quickly lay bare their great bright light, so therefore they could help other people. But it was not easy. Like when I was in Japan and went to Mount Omine, which is a Shugendo practice mountain, they hang you off a cliff, for example, by your feet, and there's no safety clicks, you know, how we have now. There's like 18 tests what you do. The night before that, we're sitting around, and my teacher is talking to someone on this mountaintop, and they look a bit worried. I said, oh, all okay, because I don't understand what they're saying. They said, oh, last year 2 people died, where we're going tomorrow. And they go, what? And you literally follow your teacher into this cave, mountainous area, and you stand on these little ledges, and the mountain goes like this. And so it's really all about trusting the teacher, doing what he says you have to do, your focus. And after you do that, you really feel a lessening of that fear and worry. And therefore, you can lay bare more your compassion. I mean, these are really extreme practices. One I couldn't do at the end. It was too scary. It was like on this mountaintop, and it was a huge boulder with a ledge about this high, and the wind blowing, and all the way down, and we're standing there, and the teacher says, oh, you do this, and you hold the boulder, and then you go like this, and there's the abyss. And they call it the ledge between living and dying. And I'm standing there like, and I'm not good with height either at all. And I kind of stretched it already during that whole day. And I'm standing there, my legs go like this, and I'm going like, no, thank you. But you can't go down because the way you climb up is also all these tests, right? So then he goes, oh, just climb over it. So then you had to climb. I might have as well gone like this because it was still bloody scary. But like they really do this kind of really strict practices to go and lay bare really quickly that inner kami or that inner great bright light. So for me, one of the interesting elements within esoteric Japanese teachings is something what is called kaji in Japan. And kaji, if you ask a priest to do kaji in Japan, they call it healing. But it has many different layers. And one of them could be hands-on. One of them could be seen as an initiation. And one of them could be as distance. But if they hear me calling it distance, they'll be whacked on my head, because for them it's not distance, it's realizing you are one with everything. So therefore you're one with the person. There's no distance whatsoever. So therefore to do kaji in that space, it's only allowed for priests and priestesses after really long training. But if you really look at how kaji is done, it's very similar as the system of Reiki. So I personally believe that Mikasui based his whole system on kaji and made it more accessible for people like a farmer or a baker without having this really difficult monk and nun training at that time. Of course, we can never really prove that because Mikasui passed away. However, if we look at the traces like Daikomyo, Chokurei, Honsei Shinen, even the other symbols, Seiheki, if we look at the precepts, if we look at hands-on healing, if we look at the initiation itself, we can see lots of common ground with kaji. Kaji is very difficult. You have to practice a lot, like it really like lots and lots and lots of training, lots of ritual practices, lots of, for example, mudras and stuff like that. But ultimately, it all comes back to you realizing and laying bare this inner great bright light. Or, I am the universe is me. And if we look at yoga, who practice yoga? Anybody? That's good. I see lots of people wearing yoga clothes here in New York, and I'm not sure if it's a fashion or if they all really practice yoga. Do we really know?
Healthy mix of both.
With a mix of both? Yeah. Okay, that's good. So anyway, so yoga actually, the word yoga means to yoke, actually to unite together. So for me, yoga is really me realizing that I am already united with that universe. So same as Reiki, right? Ultimately. Anybody else a question?
Well, on the same theme, then could somebody practice both Tai Chi and yoga and Reiki? I mean, if you're attracted to it, and how?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes Reiki is quite passive, right? You might do a little meditation, you might do some chanting, you might do some hands-on healing, while yoga also has more physical postures. And so, sometimes if we only sit like this, we might get a little bit stiff, right? So sometimes maybe it's good to also do some physical postures like yoga. But if we think yoga is only physical posture, we're also mistaken. So, like I always say, if I eat Thai every night, I might get a bit bored. After a while, I'm like, I wouldn't mind having something else. And actually, it might be good for my digestive system. So therefore, sometimes it's okay to practice different traditions. As long as you realize they all go into the same direction, and as long as you don't see it as, Reiki is different than yoga, yoga is different than Tai Chi. If you realize that your yoga practice supports your Reiki practice and that your Reiki practice supports your yoga practice, then there is no issue. That makes sense?
I'm interested in the mudras. I've
Yeah.
never heard of that.
So yeah, mudras are like hand positions.
Yeah.
However, mudra is also a body posture. In fact, the way you sit, we can say it's a mudra, or the way you sit, we can say it's a mudra. So in Japan, you have something what is called sanmitsu. And sanmitsu means the three mysteries, and it's the mystery of the body, mind, and speech. And we can clearly see this also in the system of Reiki. So the mystery of the body is the way how we sit, if we do a meditation practice, or the way how we place our hands on ourselves during hands-on healing, or the way we do our body when we do hands-on healing on someone else. Mind is, for example, visualizing of a symbol in Reiki 2. Mind is also thinking about the precepts. So, for example, why not to worry, why not to anger. So, speech is saying a mantra, or maybe saying the precepts. But ultimately, we have to be aware of that mind, body, and speech is not just these things. It's actually every body posture you do is mudra. Everything we utter is speech. Everything what comes in our mind is mind. That makes sense? Sometimes we see it as very... But ultimately that needs to flow over into your daily life. So sometimes in Japan you have a practice what is called kototama. Kototama means word carrying spirit. And often it's like very specific sounds like A, O, U, A, E, for example. A, O, U, A, E. And we can find these sounds also in the Reiki precepts. In Japanese, Gyo, Dake wa, I, Karuna, Shinpai, Sona. So they're all like these 5. And these kind of sounds too. So when we look at it, we can all find these also within the precepts. And some people say, oh, only these 5 sounds is Kototama. But actually you also have different sounds like ko and yo, or ha or ho. And then they say, oh, no, only that is Kototama. But that's not true, because ultimately it's everything we say. Every word we say carries spirit. Right? We all know that. If I say, oh, I love you, then you feel, oh, that feels nice. Or I say, hey, you're a bastard, then you go like, what? We can feel that, right? So therefore, every word carries energy, not just these specific words. But sometimes to understand that, we first start with very specific words what carry an energy. So maybe because what time? Wow, are we talking? Oh yeah, almost 9 o'clock. Oh, not almost. It's the Dutch kind of time keeping. Maybe, as I said, the Reiki 3 symbol and mantra, Great Bright Light, or Dai Komyo, also translated as the Great Light Mantra. And the Great Light Mantra is quite elaborate. So maybe I thought I'd chant the Great Light Mantra for you. So then you get an idea of maybe what it feels like. So for me, it's really like, sometimes people, they think, oh, mantra chanting is just for yourself. But actually, it's also for you. Because if I realize that I'm you and you are me, then me chanting will be beneficial for you. That makes sense? So, what I'd like you to do, I'd like you to put your feet flat on the ground, or you can just sit like that, cross-legged. It's also good, but if you sit on a chair, or you can sit cross-legged on the chair, I'm very easygoing. Or you can stand up, I don't know, lay down. And I'd like you to set your intent that you want to heal yourself and that you receive from this chanting whatever you need for that healing to take place. And for the next 7 hours, I'll be chanting. And don't worry, it's okay. You'll be on time for work tomorrow morning. After 7 hours, Bogdan brings the croissants with jam and butter and coffee. Now, after a while, I will finish. And then we just sit a little bit in that vibration. Okay? So just feel that your body is nice and relaxed. Take a couple of deep breaths into your belly. Really feel that movement. within your belly, in and out. O Navokya Bershano Makabadaramani Handamajin Paraharvaritayon. 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 like you to place your hands somewhere on or off your body where you feel you're in need of some healing. Maybe you feel some tension, maybe you have a pain or discomfort, or maybe just for whatever reason you want to place your hands somewhere. Slowly chant the precepts for you in Japanese a few times. So just keep your hands somewhere on or off your body. You can change position if you feel like. Bodake wa karuna shinpai suna kansha shite yo hakime ito ni senzetsu ni Yodake wa karuna shinpai suna kansha shite yo hakime ito ni senzetsu ni Yodake wa karuna shinpai suna kansha shite yo hakime ito ni senzetsu ni Yodake wa karuna shinpai suna kansha shite yo hakime ito ni senzetsu ni Take a couple of deep breaths and then slowly open your eyes and bring your awareness back into the room. Good. Who wants to share something about it? Could you feel that or sense that for yourself? Anybody want to?
Yeah, I felt a lot of energy in this area.
Yeah.
Like this was lighting up a lot.
Yeah, good. Yeah, and the more we can feel that lighting up, as you say, that inner light, then we can remember it again and again. And of course, when we feel lighter, we all know that if we let go of our anger and worry, do we feel heavier or lighter? We feel lighter, right? We walk through life a little bit lighter, a relationship becomes a bit lighter, work becomes a bit easier. Even that, maybe not the circumstances, but we look at things from a lighter perspective. Yeah, good. Anybody else want to?
I felt that the sun was kissing my heart.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And my body moving with the wind. So I wasn't too still when you were chanting,
Yeah.
but more like moving with like the wonder of nature.
Yeah, yeah. That's beautiful. Yeah, so the sun kissing your heart, I like it. It's, and for me, that is really what, we can talk about the system of Reiki in all sorts of crazy ways, but we can also say the sun kissing your heart, right? And when we feel that sun kissing our heart, we realize, now I feel a little bit less angry and worried and fearful. Now I feel a little bit more true to my way and my being, that movement, as you get that inner wind. Actually, often in some esoteric Buddhist traditions, inner energy often seen as wind, like movement. And it's really, as you said, that those natural elements. This is why traditionally in Japan, you've all heard of the word mandala, right? Hopefully, but often when we think of a mandala, we see there's a picture or an imagery. So in Japan, when you go into the mountains, you go into the mandala, the living mandala of the mountains. So you have the sun, what is fire, the rivers, so it's water, of course the earth, what is earth. So you have all these 5 elements, earth, water, fire, air, and space. And by connecting to this sun kissing your heart, we start to really feel these 5 elements entering and harmonizing and expanding with that universe. I am the universe is me. And then the more you feel that sunshine, then you can kiss someone else's heart, right? Yeah, it's beautiful. Thanks. Anybody else?
When you were chanting the mantra, I was getting an image of like a white lightning bolt going like up and then splitting and going like around.
Yeah. So for me also the lightning bulb is like, that inner light. And sometimes in some old traditions, in esoteric teachings, they say enlightenment happens like a lightning bolt. Because it's that if a lightning bolt would come in here, it cracks everything open. And so what cracks it open are confused thinking, our misconceptions, to lay bare this inner kami, that inner light, the inner great bright light, the inner precepts. So, yeah. Someone, yeah.
The sound when you began was almost like a quaking of that. It felt like it shook the thoughts out of my mind.
Yeah.
So it was like, when you wake up suddenly, but not in a panic state, but just kind of clearing all of that so that I lost touch with all the thoughts of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it definitely cleared space for me to sit in silence.
Yeah, so yeah, absolutely. So for me also, this is why in all of these, you were talking about yoga before. In yoga, traditionally, in Taoism, in Buddhism, even in Christianity, you have Gregorian chanting. In all of these old spiritual teachings, there's always some chanting. In shamanic practices, there's some chanting. And why? Because it creates, as you were saying, that vibration inside your body, what shakes away all this rubbish we don't need anymore, so we can let go, so we can enter that calm space. And of course, when we enter that calm space, we don't get distracted by past, present, future, and therefore we can soften our anger and our worry and fear, and be more grateful and be more true to our inner being, and therefore be more compassionate. So we can really see also that this particular mantra, Great Bright Light Daikomyo, in its longer form, is really not just for you, but also for other people. Of course, the more you as the person who's chanting embodies that, the more that will ripple out. That makes also sense. So, for example, if I chant a mantra and I'm a bit distracted, I might go like, maybe Om Nabokya Verashano Magabara Manihandama Jinbara Harbaritayum Om Nabokya Verashano Magabara Manihandama Jinbara Harbaritayum Om Nabokya Verashano Magabara. Nothing really will take place, right? But if I say, okay, let's just O Nabokya Verashano Magabadara Manihandama Jinbara Harvaritayon O Nabokya Verashano Magabadara Manihandama Jinbara Harvaritayon. It was very different, right? Mm-hmm. So it's the same with the precepts. Sometimes I see people chanting or reciting the precepts in English or in Japanese, and they go, "Kyo ke wa ikaruna." And I go like, yeah, okay, it's great. But if the more it comes from that quiet space, right? But that's with anything. If you cook, right? If you're busy and you're cooking and you're chopping, what happens? You probably chop your finger and you eat your finger in a soup, right? Or I saw you cuddling with your boyfriend. Maybe not your boyfriend, we don't know yet. That doesn't matter, right? But I saw you cuddling. If you cuddle and you're distracted, you go like, yeah, honey, I love you. I love you, honey. Yeah, it's great. Then you go like, what the hell, right? But if you really feel that quietness, then a cuddle becomes something quite different. It's the same when we do hands-on healing. If I do hands-on healing on myself and yeah, it's nice, or I can go into that space. Something quite different. That makes sense? So it's the same, maybe do you want to come and sit here for a minute?
Sure.
What's your name?
Dora.
Dora. Dora the Explorer. So it's the same if I do a treatment on someone else, I can go like this and be a bit distracted and go like, nice, it's fun, New York is great. I'm going to go dancing later on, I don't know. Or I can go, okay. Feels different, right? Do you feel the difference?
Yes.
So, thank you, Dora,
Thank you.
the Explorer. So, therefore, always when we do the chanting as much as possible, staying first in that quiet space, or when you do hands-on healing, or even when you do a yoga posture, or when you snuggle up with your boyfriend, or when you cook, or it doesn't matter. Yeah, you wanted to say something.
Yes, I wanted to add on. You were saying something about vibration, the sound that you made, and when she said that, it made me think of the common sound that comes from meditating, and it's Om.
Yeah.
I think it is, right? So, but it's that Om.
Yeah.
That gives a vibration that
Yeah.
that made me understand. Like it's my first time in a Reiki anything.
Oh, great.
So, and it's just and coming from like a yoga perspective, I see the interconnectedness.
Yeah.
So the thoughts when she was asking, like how do they all come together? And you're saying the intention is all there. It's all similar in the end.
Yeah.
It's all giving light. It's all understanding. It's all compassion.
Yeah.
So even though they're all separate and people may be like kind of like hovered within their own practice, they're all connected somehow, whether it be by sound, by movement, by energy. So I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. And the vibration also, for me is very simple. If you have a car, why do we bring a car once in a while to the garage? Because when it's driving, it vibrates on the road and all these nuts and bolts are getting loose, right? And it's the same, the more we vibrate, all this tension, all the anger and worry, we hold on really tight, slowly we can let go. Slowly it becomes loose, loose, loose. And therefore we go back to kami, or we go back to this inner bright light, or however we call it. Anybody else? Question or to share?
I have a question
Yeah.
about the concept of healing.
Yes.
So many times we receive healing and give healing, and yet that thing that we want to heal is not
Heal.
healed. So how does that mean, like I don't want to get in like karma, or I have to learn something. Like how do I think about this idea of but still I'm not healed?
Yeah. I mean, first, it's a really important element. My father died 16 years ago of cancer. I did Reiki for him didn't mean he miraculously healed himself, right? But actually, through the hands-on healing and distance healing between brackets, he passed away really peacefully. So it was really interesting because my father was not a person to say that, and just before he died, he said, "Oh, I think I'm ready now. Just give me a little push and I'm going." And off he went. And it was really interesting. So for me, we also have to think about what is healing. Is healing my pain in my knee? Or is healing that I become a little bit less angry and worried, but I still have the pain in my knee? So we might say that becoming less angry and worried and still have the pain in the knee is definitely also healing, right? Because that means I'm less of a bastard to someone else. So therefore, that might even have a bigger ripple effect than getting rid of the pain. So for me, the most interesting metaphors in the system of Reiki are the Reiki 3 symbol and mantra, great bright light. Or, as you said, you felt the sun kissing your heart. So, therefore, we can see it as the sun. All we have to do when we heal ourselves, or when we, and I do between brackets, heal other people, because we don't really heal other people. If I could heal someone, then I'll go stand on Union Square, healed, and within no time, New York will be the most compassionate city in the world, right? And then I teach you how to do it, and then you all go out, and then how many millions of tourists come here, and then soon that will spread like wildfire, and the whole world is healed. But we all know that is not the truth, right? We cannot do it. So therefore, we have to ask, what is healing? For me, healing is really being that light for myself, like the sun, and for other people. However, the sun is not saying you need 2 rays, and you need 6, and you need 20, and you can't do it. You don't get any. You've been naughty, right? The sun is just shining. But we take according to what we need. So it's the same for me. The more I feel that inner light, I'm not saying, oh, I need to get rid of this, or I need to get rid of that issue, or I have this headache. I just let that sun shine, my inner light shine. If it goes, my headache, it's great. If it stays, it's also good. Because else, if I really want to heal this pain in my knee, and I have such a desire and attachment to healing it, I hold it like this, right? Can it now go? No, it's kind of stuck. So the more desire and attachment I have to healing myself, the more I hold it like this. But if I say, just let it shine, we get a very different attitude. It's very difficult if we might have cancer or severe pain or issues or emotional stuff, because we have such a desire to get rid of it. Or if we have a loved one who is very sick, say maybe with cancer, and we go, oh, that needs to be gone, that needs to be gone. But then when we hold it like this, it's not going to go anywhere. We have to just say, whatever happens, happens. If it stays, it stays. If it goes, it goes. And therefore, then we set ourselves free. Then we set our client free. And then more possibilities are possible. That makes sense?
Yeah.
But it's very difficult to do if we have a lot of attachment. So therefore, first of all, healing comes from yourself. Right? When I do a treatment on someone, say you come and lay down for a treatment, I always say, okay, I'd like you to set your intent that you want to heal yourself. And that you receive from this session whatever you need for that healing to take place. But sometimes I've had it where people sit up and go, oh, excuse me, aren't you going to heal me? I said, no, you're going to heal yourself. Like, I know Michael had an accident with his foot, and a doctor fixed it with some metal plates, but he still had to heal himself, right? The doctor didn't really heal him. He facilitated something, but he still had to do it himself. That makes sense?
So essentially, like, what is the role of a Reiki practitioner? Is it a facilitator?
Yes, a facilitator. I like that word much better. But, sometimes because we're so used to the word healing and healer, we might need to use that for convenience sake, but as long as we really think we're more like a facilitator. Or the word reiju, what is traditionally the Japanese word for attunement or initiation, what happens in Reiki 1 or 2 or 3, if you translate it, ju can also mean offering. So, and rei means spirit, so spiritual offering is a little bit like this. I'm offering it to you, but you need to take it. You need the willingness to take it. We can take a horse to the water, but we can't make it drink, right? So therefore, we can jump all up and down, but if that person is only saying, I'm only taking one sip, then that's okay. If they want to take the whole lot, it's also okay. But however, if I want to give you tea, I always say that if I want to give you tea, what do I have to have? Tea, right? If I don't have tea, I cannot give you tea. Or in other words, if I have mislaid my own light, how can I shine that light on you? Sometimes I see it a bit like this. Thank you for your whatever it was, water, something. Sometimes I see it a bit like this. I'm not going to call anybody. I'm going to call the Ghostbusters. It is a light, right? So the more you as a practitioner connect to this light, and then you shine on that person, and now due to you shining that light on that person can find their inner light, their inner potential, their inner calming. But if I'm still grasping in the dark, now I'm going like this, and we're both in the dark, it will be very difficult for both of us to find that light. That makes sense? Mm-hmm. So therefore, the most important thing for a practitioner, no matter if it's yoga, tai chi, or qigong, or the system of Reiki, if you want to help other people, is first of all finding your own inner bright light. Your inner joy, your inner happiness, no anger, no worry, so therefore no attachment to a certain outcome. If I do a treatment on a person and I worry about what they might feel, or I worry about the outcome, or I worry that they're not healed, then I'm worrying. Where's my energy? Also somewhere worrying, right? But if I don't worry at all, then your energy is also more free. That makes sense? I think it's almost, because...
We have till 9:30.
Says the
Don't worry,
boss.
don't worry. No rush.
Yeah.
Yes.
We do have 15 more minutes, but I was curious. So we've spoken a lot today about Shugendo and the Buddhist influence on Reiki. The first time I ever heard the word kami, I heard it in a Shinto perspective.
Yeah.
Is there significant or Shinto influence?
Absolutely. I mean, this is a really interesting thing in Japan. So my teacher, he's a Shugendo priest, he's a Tendai priest, he's a Shingon priest, and he is a Shinto practitioner priest, right? He's all of them. But here we say we're either Christian, and then we have diversions in that, we this or that. But in Japan, it's so interwoven. So for example, Shugendo is a mix of Shintoism, Taoism, Buddhism, shamanic practices, where they have really utilized all these different things into one stream. And in Japan also you could have like a Buddhist wedding, a Buddhist birth, and you have a Christian wedding, and then you have a Shinto funeral. It's quite normal. But we don't really say, I'm going to have a Christian, I'm going to be baptized, and then I'm going to be Catholic, and then when I die, I have whatever. We often don't do that. But so it's a little bit sometimes, I think, for modern practitioners to realize that in Japan it's very interwoven. So you have all these strands of spiritual practices within maybe even Tendai or within Shugendo or within Shingon or within Shinto, and you see lots of similarities. But it's really nice about my teacher because he would say, oh, for example, there's this practice, I just do something. And he said, oh, in Shugendo or in Tendai it does this, and then in Shingon it does that, and in Shintoism it does this. He said, well, one way, it doesn't matter really, they've just done it so it looks a bit different, and we can compartmentalize it and say, but there's so many overlapping things. You go to a Tendai mountain and you see a Shinto shrine, or you see a Pure Land temple, or you see a Shugendo practice ground. It's quite fascinating. This is what I really like about going to Japan, that interwovenness and accepting of all the other practices. But also, unfortunately, there came a time where that was not the case. In Mikasui's time, Shugendo was outlawed, for example, and Buddhism, a lot of Buddhist stuff had to be under Shintoism, for example, and then it was also divided. But now that is slowly coming back again, into this more common ground. So, yeah. Yes?
Question about if this is all our birthright.
Yeah.
What is happening during the initiation, and what are we receiving that is helping us later through that?
Oh, do you have another 6 hours?
Bullet points.
So sometimes, I think when the system of Reiki was in Japan, it was called Reiju. And then when the system came to the West, it was first called initiation. And only after Mrs. Takada brought the system to the West, when C died, then it became attunement. I think people start to call it an attunement after C passed away because I think at that time initiation was a little bit more like, you're being initiated into the Masons, for example, and there were certain connotations about the word initiation. But I really like the word initiation. So for me, the initiation is where the teacher shines as much as possible by practicing on themselves that light, right? Not the iPhone, but their inner light, or I can't even get it to work, their inner light. And so that person who they shining, now I can't switch it off. Hello, Apple. We could ask Siri, isn't it? How do you do that? I don't even know. What is the attunement? Okay, you can show me later. So that's why I said I only use the iPhone for my calculator for the time. No, so it is where you shine as much as possible as you can that light, so that the person where you're working with in this spiritual reiju or spiritual blessing, spiritual offering, has the initial or can have the initial experience, initiation, that have the initial experience of their own inner bright light, or maybe feeling some energy or seeing something, sometimes that is okay, or ultimately that they feel a sense of, oh, I feel less angry, less worried, I feel a bit more grateful, I feel a little bit more that true self, that inner being laid bare, and I feel a little bit more compassionate. So when we have that initial experience, it's almost like a seed. Right? It's not that the teacher gives you that seed is already inside of you, but we have forgotten. So suddenly we get that initial experience, but then it goes kind of away again. So we can water this seed, we can water this initial experience with hands-on healing, with chanting the precepts or thinking about the precepts, with doing the meditations like Joshin Kokyu-ho, with more hands-on healing, with meditating on the symbols, with chanting the mantras, so that one day this initial experience, this initiation, becomes to fruition, and maybe during the whole day we feel less angry, less worried, less fearful, or during the whole day we might feel that inner bright light, or during the whole day we might feel that the whole day and the night the sun is kissing our heart. That makes sense? So it's not really where the teacher does something magically to you. Sometimes people think that. And again, I think if I could do something magically on you and attune you to Reiki, spiritual energy, then really, if we are really that spiritual energy like this, a magic switch, then we are also no more anger, no more worry, no more fear, then we're grateful and being compassionate. So then I'm going to do it in Union Square, next, and I'll teach you how to do it, next. And again, within no time, New York is the most peaceful place on earth. And then we all do it on all the tourists and they go home. But we all know that the attunement doesn't do that either, right? If we really think about it. So it's where hopefully that person has that initial experience of, I like that, the sun kissing your heart, and then, then we forget about it because later on someone says something to us, or a partner, or something at work, or we worry about something, but then we keep practicing and we feel, oh, that feels like the sun kissing my heart again, that feels nice. And then suddenly that feels not just for 1 minute, but maybe for 10, and maybe for a half an hour, or maybe for the whole day. And then we wake up in the middle of the night and we go, oh, the sun is still kissing my heart. And that for me is really the system of Reiki in a nutshell.
Those were good bullet points.
How are we doing? Oh, perfect. So, thank you for listening to me. And I see it's kind of recorded somehow with these lovely apparatus over here. So thank you, Bogdan. Thank you, Firefly Society, for inviting me in this hot summer night in New York. I was just walking here from the yoga studio where I'm teaching, and I go, wow, it's so packed and busy. And I go, damn, there are some really good-looking men and women in New York. Wow, hey, I was like, they all look good. So go out in this nice, warm, sunny night. Say hi to everybody you meet. Shine this beautiful light. Kiss their heart. And I'll see you next time. If you have any questions, actually tomorrow we do a Reiki play day where we do a whole day kind of this kind of stuff. A bit less talking, where it's more about really having a direct experience. It's in Reflections Yoga Studio, 24th Street corner, 3rd Avenue, I think. And then on Friday, Saturday, Monday, I teach there a Shinpadan Reiki 3 class. So if you want, you can still welcome to come. Or next time I might be in New York. I'm planning again something next year. So thank you so much, and thank you for organizing.
Thank you.